Hi, I'm Amy Eisenstein. Welcome to Ask a Fundraising Expert. Today I have Sarah Durham here with me. She is the founder and CEO of Big Duck, a firm that's exclusively doing communications for nonprofits, and I am proud to call her a friend, a mentor, and a colleague. I'm so excited to have her. Welcome, Sarah.
High praise. Back at you.
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about nonprofit branding, and let's just begin by talking about the Rebrand Effect. Tell me what it is and how you came up with this idea.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite topics. Thank you for asking. You know, I have found for years and years and years that nonprofits have been talking about rebranding. But a lot of times there's this sort of murky sense of what an organization is going to get from it. So a lot of nonprofits lately have been rebranding because they think it's going to help with fundraising, or maybe they think it'll help with recruiting programs or, you know, better board members. And I know with the organizations that I work with at Big Duck that there are a lot of great outcomes. But what I wanted to answer was kind of in a statistically valid, you know, quantitative sense, what really happens to the typical nonprofit when they rebrand. Mm-hmm. So we partnered with a market research firm called the FDR Group, and we had their help designing a national study, and we had over 341 people who worked in nonprofits who responded to the survey, and all said that their organization had rebranded in the last 10 years. So the Rebrand Effect was the study, and then we wrote an ebook, which you can download at bigducknyc.com/rebrand effect.
Great, that's a great response rate. So what did the study show? Tell us.
Well, you know, the fact is rebranding works. It works for most organizations that go through it. We asked organizations about 11 different things they might have changed, and we defined a rebrand as changing somewhere between 1 and 6 of variables like your name, your messaging, your logo, really core communications that impact everything, not your website. That's not a rebrand.
Right, okay.
And what we saw was over 50% of the organizations that had rebranded saw a lift in revenue. They saw increased revenue, and actually 17% said it was too soon to tell. So we're cautiously optimistic about those guys. It turns out that a huge number of nonprofits have been rebranding in the last few years. So for those organizations, it's early days. What we saw was that organizations that rebrand almost immediately feel a lift in their staff's capacity. Staff can communicate more consistently, they feel like they're on message, and that's immediately empowering, and that has a ripple effect.
Yeah, that's great. So 2 questions. One is, how would an organization know when it's time for a rebrand, or even to consider that? How would they start the conversation? Let's start with that first question.
Yeah, well, we see organizations sort of asking the question in a lot of different stages. Oftentimes there's a person in the organization who feels like the messaging or the way things look and feel and sound just doesn't feel right. It feels stale. And they might be a change agent who are kind of lobbying to get other people to do things a little differently. But actually, one of the really exciting parts of the study was we looked at the factors that had been influential in the rebrand. Either why did an organization do it, what did they think was going to happen, or what else was going on at the time they did it. And what we saw was a real corollary between a new strategic plan and a new leader, and both an organization's decision to rebrand and having a positive benefit. So I think of the new leader as kind of like the power of the new coach or the new sort of dynamic person. Okay. That, you know, new person comes in and they're a change agent, and branding becomes one of many changes they influence. And same thing like with strategic planning. You know, you get more focused, you know what you're doing programmatically, and that is a great time to rethink how you express that.
Right. And what would you say to a board that's considering a rebrand, and maybe some of the board members are for it and other board members are against it? How do you guide that conversation, or what advice do you have for development directors or executive directors who are trying to go through this process?
Yeah, a lot of times when the board is gunning for a rebrand, it's sort of a way of reflecting a disconnect. It's often the board's way of saying we don't know how to talk about the work. And I think the question is, does the staff feel the same way? In my experience, most nonprofit executive directors and CEOs are actually pretty good at talking about their work. That's what they do every day. They're out in the field talking about the work. The question is, can the development staff do that? Can the programs person do that? And if they can't, and they, like the board, feels like it's time to make a change, then that's probably a good indicator something needs to happen. But sometimes the board just needs help articulating the story, you know, being trained to tell the story, because they don't live it the way the staff lives it.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way of explaining it. Can everybody at your organization tell the same story?
Yeah.
And if they can't, you probably have a serious issue in terms of fundraising and being out there and communicating. Right?
I think that's true, and I think it's important to remember that when we talk about branding, I mean, it's a word that's kind of thrown around a little bit loosely. When we talk about branding, we're really talking about perceptions. We're talking about how those donors perceive your organization, how they feel about the organization, and perceptions can be a little bit murky, but odds are good that if you're not communicating well internally, you're probably not communicating well externally.
Yeah, you led me right into my next question, and that was about donors. Talk about how an organization should roll out a rebrand and donors' reactions.
Yeah, I think a really good place to start is to ask the question, who's really going to care? If you're an organization that has a very kind of engaged community or donors who have been giving deeply for many, many years, then they are going to care. They're going to wonder why you're making changes. They might wonder why you're spending money on these kinds of things. And it's important to manage their expectations thoughtfully. So I often encourage organizations to break those external audiences into kind of tiers. You know, a tier 1 group are people who really need to be shepherded through the process, and ideally not just told it's happened, but brought into it at the beginning and have a voice in it throughout the whole thing. You know, tier 2 might be a group of people who an organization notifies, like members at a conference who, you know, learn that their organization is going through a change through some special, maybe, you know, teleconference events or at a conference. But, you know, a lot of lower level donors, you know, smaller individual donors don't necessarily need to be walked through a big flashy announcement. They just need to understand that the organization's getting stronger and smarter.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way of putting it. I love the way you say, who's going to care? And really be thoughtful about who does this matter to, and bringing them in at the beginning of the process, those bigger donors and people who are really engaged and involved. All right, good. So what's a last piece of advice or your number one recommendation that you'd like to leave viewers with in terms of what you would recommend to a board or to a CEO?
Well, I think one of the takeaways of the Rebrand Effect, and one of the things we see in our work at Big Duck, is that going through a rebranding process for a nonprofit is a bit like renovating your home. It's useful and it makes you feel really good, but really where you raise money is in campaigning and that's like the parties you throw in your home. So don't assume just because you're going to rebrand that it's a sort of, you know, field of dreams. If we build it, they will come. It's really just an evolution, and it's a way of creating a platform so you can do the heavy lifting you need to do as a fundraiser. So I would encourage you to consider rebranding, but put it in a larger context. Don't assume that it's the beginning and end. Think of it as the on-ramp to communicating differently.
Yeah, I love that. So the rebrand is not the end of the fundraising, it's just the beginning.
Right.
And I think it's very helpful to motivate your board members and your staff, and so that everybody's communicating the same message and excited about the new vision for the organization.
Yep, exactly. Rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
really
having me.
appreciate it. All right, thanks, Sarah. Now it's your turn to share. I hope you'll join the discussion and help others by leaving a comment below. Did this video inspire you to try something new? Do you have an example or story to share? Do you agree or disagree with today's advice? If so, please let me know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, be sure to share it with your friends and followers. Finally, if you want to learn even more ways to supercharge your fundraising, visit my website, trypointfundraising.com. Join my list, and as a thank you, you'll get 2 of my most popular ebooks for free. That's the end of today's episode, but I hope you're feeling inspired and empowered. Thanks so much for doing your part to make the world a better place. I hope to see you next time on Ask the Fundraising Expert.